Netherlands who might tell the staff member that the report is simply not good enough, and why. Now that we understand how the different values we looked at impact how cultures communicate, let's examine what can happen when people with different approaches come together. Well, a typical perception people who are indirect communicators might have of someone more direct is that they are brash, rude, and even inconsiderate. They can find such people overbearing, unconcerned with people's feelings, and way too confrontational. Rather than risk losing face, they tend to withdraw and communication can become difficult. Direct communicators, however, tend to see indirect communicators as confusing, unclear, guarded, and even devious. A direct communicator tends to interpret the lack of clear information as a sign that something is being hidden. Unable to read non-verbal cues, body language, and other ways of communicating feelings, they fully place their understanding on what is said. This difference in communication style can cause many sorts of challenges when it comes to working with different cultures. Let's consider the following scenario, which can help us see how these differences can come into play in a professional setting. Again, it's based on a real-life anecdote. Wang is from China and has moved to work in a large company in Denmark. When he arrived at the company, he had the opportunity to meet with the directors during a lunchtime meeting. He was looking forward to the meeting as he had a list of questions and areas for discussion that he wanted to put to his seniors. His colleagues were aware that Wang was excited and wanted to demonstrate his abilities. The meeting came to an end without Wang having asked a single question. His colleagues assumed he no longer felt he wanted to share his ideas and said they were sorry he could not ask his questions. A month later, Wang again attends another meeting including directors, but again fails to ask anything. At the end of the meeting, he pulls a trusted colleague to one side and asks, "Why are they not interested in my ideas?" His colleague instantly understands something has gone wrong in terms of communication. Do you have any ideas? Well, Wang comes from a culture which places stress on formality, face, and stability. As a result, he's much more indirect in his communication style. Wang kept quiet in the first and second meeting for a number of reasons. For one, he was in front of superiors. He believes it's up to the superiors to invite him to talk. For him to put himself forward or to start talking without an invitation would be considered rude. His culture places emphasis on being polite, formal, and ensuring you save face. He assumed that if he just interrupted proceedings, that he would damage his face and also potentially the directors too. In the second meeting, he again waited to be invited to speak and interpreted the absence of any formal verbal welcome as a reason not to speak. It's only his exasperation that finally leads to him expressing how he feels and eventually discovering how meetings run in Denmark. So, in this topic, we've seen that communication differences are driven by a number of different values, all of which play an extremely important role. Once we come to understand these values, we're able to understand the way in which they might become manifest in how people think and behave. This can also help us analyse ourselves and help us understand the impact our own communication preferences might have on others. In the next topic, we'll be looking at teamwork and the way in which our values shape the way teams behave. In this topic, we're looking at teamwork and, again, how our values can create different approaches to and expectations around working as a team. As with the previous approaches, let's start with another scale to give us some points of reference. Here, you can see we have two extremes which show how people can differ when it comes to the way they think about their role within a team. At one end, we have an individual approach. In this approach, people see themselves essentially as distinct from their teams. Their identity, their careers, and their goals are driven by their independent ambitions. Their focus is mainly, if not solely, on getting their own jobs done. They are less likely to involve their colleagues in their work and decision making, more likely to pass complicated work over to someone else once they've done their bit. At the other end of the scale, we have people who take on a more group approach. They see themselves first and foremost as a team member, as part of a whole unit. Unlike the individual approach, these individuals are more likely to see the needs of the team as being more important than their personal needs or careers. Their focus is on building strong relationships within the workplace and working collaboratively to get something done. So, what values might be driving these different approaches? Well, there are of course several, but let's look at three: responsibility, hierarchy, and collectivism. Responsibility relates to where, in cultural terms, people place accountability. In some cultures, considerable emphasis is placed on the belief that individuals have control over what happens within their lives, and that, as a result, they are responsible for any outcomes of their decisions. In such cultures, people are congratulated for accepting blame. In some cases, it may even be considered a noble act. As a result, such cultures also tend to be a lot quicker at openly and publicly blaming people for errors. In cultures with a group focus approach, however, less emphasis is placed on an individual's responsibility. This is due to an understanding that there are greater forces at work in the world over which individuals have no control. As such, success or failure is considered to be due to many factors and not necessarily because of something that the individual might have done. Individuals are far less likely, therefore, to stand up and apologise for something that's gone wrong. And if they do, they're typically expressing general remorse on behalf of their group. Publicly blaming people and accepting blame are generally seen to damage someone's face and reputation. When we look at the world and where different cultures exhibit different attitudes to responsibility and individualism, we notice an interesting trend. In the countries of the world that lean more towards individual responsibility, such as the USA, South Africa, Australia, and the UK, we tend to see the people coming from more multicultural backgrounds. In countries that lean more towards the idea of group responsibility, such as India, China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia, we find that the people are far more homogenous. Countries such as the USA and Australia were essentially a mix of settled people from other parts of the world. The Chinese and Indians, however, have a much longer shared history. The next value of collectivism is closely related to this idea of where and how countries were shaped. The experience of settlers in countries such as Canada, Argentina, New Zealand heavily influences the modern-day leaning towards individualism we see in these countries. Their histories and identities are written by people who emigrated, leaving family units to start new lives. Without a sense of country or group, individuals